Well, thanks for being here today. I'm Christopher Ream. I was in last year's PEPM class. I am just going to introduce, well, not actually introduce, but just let you know that Patricia, Abdelghani, and Getza are here with us. They are going to introduce themselves and speak very briefly on their experiences and their roles currently in development economics in the broad. Our goal in this panel really follows what you just heard, that central banking has ever changed. The financial crisis has certainly changed the private sector world, so we want to take a moment to hear what has changed in development economics, specifically with an eye towards what does it mean for us as PEPM alumni in terms of career opportunities, in where trends in work in development economics may be moving. So let me ask very quickly, just to begin, before we do introductions, to get a little test survey here. How many of us in this group would describe their work in any fashion related to development economics? Or if your students would want to do that? Okay. So it's small within it. How many within the group might describe themselves as interested in the space and may look at it as a career option either now or somewhere into the future? Okay. Okay. A mixed group across. That helps us. What we want to do is talk about current trends in development economics, and we want to be flexible into what is of interest to you. So just as a matter of a program note, we would ask that you interrupt us constantly along the way. It is a Q&A session from beginning to end. If you have a comment or a question, please jump in so that we're not just talking, we're actually having a discussion. And just to support what David said earlier, this is a good group discussion that is of the spirit of what the Facebook page has been built for, what the LinkedIn group for PEPM is built for, that we are a great resource among each other to share ideas within our professional space as well as within our career interests. We should be thinking about the questions we have and directing them towards those types of tools and resources. So let this discussion be a start of that. Patricia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. My name's Patricia Seats. Before I came to PEPM, I was a public policy economist in the UK, and I did policy and research work on local economies and which markets might have been failing and which markets might not have been failing, even if the politician in charge at the time thought that they were failing to deliver what he wanted. I joined PEPM in 2008. Partly hoping to move out of economics, actually. I was attracted to the management side of the programme, but I ended up, after my internship, going to work as an economist in the World Bank for 3 years on food markets in Eastern and Southern Africa. And I joined the UK Department for International Development last year in a recruitment round for professional specialists, and I'm now an advisor in the economic growth team in Nigeria. I'm referred to as a lead advisor for trade, financial sector stability and financial sector deepening, and Lagos's role as the commercial capital of Nigeria. It's a bit of a misnomer to say I'm a lead advisor, because in practice I work with program officers to manage our programs in those areas, and I don't do a lot of advice.
Good afternoon. My name is Abdelghani Lakhdar, Abdelghani Lakhdar, the way it's pronounced in my country, but lots among you will not pronounce it exactly as it is. Just to give you a little bit about my background, the 3 periods before joining PEPM, I am purely government or public sector products. So the whole experience, of my experience is within the government and the public sector. I used to be a national auditor within the government auditing office, mainly in public policies evaluation, and I used to be in charge of international economic relations, mainly the World Trade Organization, and at that time I had the opportunity to negotiate both multilateral agreements within the WTO and the free trade agreement of my country with United States. And also I have the opportunity to participate and to prepare a lot of international economic events for my minister. Also, I was in charge of relations with the European Union, and the European Union for Morocco is the most important partner, whether it's trade, investment, and also a lot of Moroccans live in the European Union, and so there are lots of remittances from Europe to Morocco. After that, I took the decision to do the PEPM, the Program of Economic Policy Management, mainly to enrich my background from the economic side, because I was dealing with a lot of economics, and my background before that is I am an engineer, basically. After PEPM, I came back to the Ministry of Finance, the Department of Treasury, to deal mainly with macroeconomic issues, relationships with the International Monetary Fund, the WTO, and also lots of macroeconomic issues in terms of balance of payments and exchange rate management. 1 year later, or 1 year and a half, I was appointed as director within a major project that had just been launched by Morocco, which is the Casablanca Finance City. Casablanca Finance City is a national project to turn Casablanca into a regional financial center, and my job was to work on the institutional and legal dimensions of this project, because to be a regional or international financial centers, you have to fulfill and to gather a lot of criteria and of competitiveness compared to the region and compared to the world, in order to attract the best international financial institutions and also companies on strategy and low taxation, etc. And very recently, in January, I was appointed as advisor to the head of government after new elections, which is a very challenging job, I would say, because in Morocco, in no time, a government has been under pressure to deliver and to produce and to give results, because it's a government which has been elected in a very transparent way. And the whole region, the Arab Spring and all what has been done in this region, Morocco is experiencing a very peaceful transition, but with really higher expectations. So the government is under pressure to deliver. The people are really expecting, there are huge expectations, and the economic situation that we inherited now is not really very comfortable as it used to be, and we will have the opportunity to speak about this. Thank
you. Good afternoon. I hope we're able to keep you all awake. I graduated from the PEPM. I'm not always sure what year it is. I was here in 98, 99. Officially is in 1999. 1999. So I graduated in 1999 here. That's 12 long years ago, and it's been quite a ride. So one thing I can share with you is don't make assumptions about your career. You never know where you go. I'll just share a bit of it. By way of introduction, after graduating from PEPM, I spent 6 months interning at the World Bank. And went back to my earlier career as a diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the government of Bhutan. I spent 3.5 years back here in New York working at the permanent mission to the United Nations, working mainly on the economic and social affairs part of the work. I went back 2005 back to my ministry, and I was actually selected by the government to be part of a national research team to work on a medium and long-term strategic economic plan for Bhutan. We were just at the cusp of transitioning into a democracy in 2008. New challenges. The government felt that we needed to rethink our development strategy, and a group of young, I would say, I was still young then, a group of young people from different sectors of the government were put together, and we worked full-time 1 year very intensively doing research and coming up with a strategic economic plan for Bhutan. it was fully organic. I mean, we didn't use consultants, we didn't use any external expertise. We pretty much, it was pretty much in-house capacity that we, that was used to come up with the strategy. Spent a year on that, following which sometimes you should really be careful what you wish for. I mean, during this whole research exercise, I really had a very strong focus on education. I just felt that all our plans would mean nothing if we didn't get education right, and I really advocated strongly to put education as a central theme in the strategic economic plan. And sure enough, 1 year later, I was given a special assignment to actually set up the Royal Education Council of Bhutan to look at education, look at the challenges of education, look at the opportunities of our education system, and actually come up with a comprehensive education reform for Bhutan. I spent two years on that, established the Royal Education Council, worked with a team of researchers, again, fully from home, including, but this time we worked with a lot of partners outside, including from Columbia University. My former director, Professor Batiz, was very, very helpful actually in a lot of our work. So we, that was a very challenging phase of my life, because I realized I'd studied economics all my time. I always thought economics was my career, and all of a sudden I'm given education, and the only thing I knew about education was what as parents we know about education, and that was a very, very interesting experience for me, really understanding how education, something that's may totally be unrelated to development, how imperative or how vital it is actually to a country's development strategy. And following that, I left the government, established it, new government was formed, we were a democracy, handed over the council to the new government that was established, and I came here back to New York. My wife was working in UNICEF. Family circumstances made it very difficult and I had to make a choice. So in the name of women's liberation, I humbly bowed down. I mean, my family's been following me for 14 years. I thought it was time that I followed them around. So I came here, spent a year, did some work on His Majesty's Foundation, the King of Bhutan. I helped establish the chapter of the foundation here in New York. And looked around pretty much at 43, looking for a new career in a not very good time. Was not the most comforting of things, but I looked around and had some opportunities at the UN, did some consultancy, and here I am now working in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I work as a consultant in the Development Policy and Analysis Division. We work on a macroeconomic advisory project, which is a new initiative by UNDESA to try and provide alternative macroeconomic advice to developing countries, not necessarily always in contradiction to the World Bank and IMF, but alternative to what the IMF and the World Bank may provide. It's a pilot project. I believe it's going well. And the good thing is Bhutan is a program country, and I'm happy to be able to, again, continue serving my country in my own small capacity. Also serve as an advisor to the FETSA Institute. So, and this is very interesting because this institute promotes love and forgiveness. So I say, be careful, don't shut your career out. So very strangely, through some mutual friends, mutual contacts, a professional network, they have invited me to join the FETSA Institute. It's a $400 million institute. It has an endowment of $400 million with a mission to promote love and forgiveness. I serve as an advisor there. So I'll be very happy to share any questions that colleagues may have. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. So what I hope you get a perspective is that in looking at development economics, in this panel, we can represent both from the donor side as well as from the strategy and the governmental use side of development. What we don't have, and we hope might come from the discussion inside of the group, might be those who are practitioners in development, especially at the project level. So as you hear comments, again, please throw them in your thought, or throw your thoughts in as you hear them. We wanted to talk about some of these topics, broadly on the topics, in two large themes, the most obvious of which is that the world has changed in terms of the economies of both the developed and the developing world, and the money available for traditional development is significantly altered because of it. And so we want to understand a little bit more about how that has impacted the sphere of development, both in terms of what it means on a larger strategy for countries using development funds, as well as what it could mean for career opportunities. The second is more interesting and perhaps more controversial in terms of how to describe this, but taking a lead from The Economist magazine's description of big development at the nation level versus small development at the project level. We wanted to try to get some thoughts on how people might see that distinction, and is it relevant to their work. Professor Lukauskas, perhaps you may have as well some thoughts on just bifurcating development that way if it's appropriate. So we'll want to bug you about that in a minute. But maybe we could take a minute here in the panel just to start with that first bigger discussion. How do we look at the discussion of big development, again, nation-level strategy and planning for development, versus small development, project level? How do you view this distinction, and do you find it relevant to your experience? Patricia, do you want to step in first briefly?
Okay, sure. Well, I think I'm biased by my background and my training to big development. That's the sort of work that I do, policy reform, regulatory reform, system development. And I think that's also the trend, and I think that the evidence from the rapidly growing, rapidly reducing poverty countries suggests that big development is effective development. But I don't want to rule out. Project development either. I think it's complementary. I guess the other thing I could say is that I'm biased because I work in a country of 160 million people with 36 states, and some of those states are not states that many donors are prepared to go and work in, even before there was a recent escalation in insecurity in those states. So in my current field as well, it has to be big development, because small development isn't feasible on that scale, in that place.
For sure, we need both. I mean, and both have to converge. I mean, if I take my country as an example, Morocco, for more than 50 years, we have been focusing on what may say big development, regulatory reforms, the infrastructure at a large scale. But now we are just saying, and we are. I mean, our experience shows us that we forgot to give more attention to the small, not the small projects, but the social needs in the rural areas, and in some areas that we did not care about during all these 50 years. So our country really did fairly well during these 50 countries, and if you come to Morocco, and if you go to Casablanca or to Rabat or to Marrakesh, you cannot say that this is a country of less than $3,000 GDP per capita. It's impossible to say that it's a country for 10,000, for example. But you have to travel in this country in other areas in order to get to know that there are a lot to do at a regional and local and the local level, and this is not big developments. So we have to pay attention and to respond to the social needs and to respond to specific needs to the local people. A country cannot move with different paths and different paces. And this is what happened. This is good. I mean, the big infrastructure is good. The big regulatory reforms are good for the country. Focusing on human capital at a higher level is good, but without forgetting the specific needs, the small companies, the microfinance. I mean, all this. We have to pay attention. We have to pay attention and to give a lot of priority right now. I mean, we have to focus more on, without forgetting, as Patricia said, big development will be always necessary, and we cannot do without it. You cannot do without good infrastructure. You cannot do if you don't deal with regulatory reforms. If you are not competitive, I mean, competitiveness is a set of dimensions which you have to fulfill all of them. But if you focus only on this, if you can have, it can seem to you, and it can seem to politicians and to international institutions that really they did help, but if the growth is not inclusive to all people and to all companies, this is not a success. So we need to focus on small development. I mean, small development is just for me, I mean, a way to say that to focus on small projects at the very specific level, not the very big projects to which international institutions fund usually with governments. Thank
you. If I may just very briefly share, based on my own experience working in the context of a small developing country, I think the debate should not be whether it's big development or small development, which is the sort of the magic bullet, or which is the option that whether it's the World Bank or whether it's at the government level, which one should we be focusing on more? I would sort of tend to look at both these approaches being two sides of the same coin. You know, at the end of the day, they're tools, and whether it's a big development approach or a small development approach, I see them more as tools. More importantly, I think, particularly from my own experience, I see as it's more important, I think, that whether it's governments, the planning officials, in the government, or whether it's development partners, be it the World Bank, be it the United Nations, be it bilateral donors. I think what seems to be a problem for a lot of the developing countries is there's no time perspective on development. And most of the developing countries pretty much have a 5-year perspective to planning. I mean, that has been the case in my country until this national team that I talked to you about was formed. Until 2007, we just planned for 5 years. What can you do in 5 years? You know? So I think the important thing is to have a short-term perspective, a medium-term perspective, and a longer-term perspective to planning at a national level. So the so-called big development approach, I think, should have that perspective is important. Having that perspective, there's also, I think, a need to increasingly, I think, look at development from a more, how do we integrate the different sectors? You know, you either hear on the macroeconomic side, or you hear about health, you hear about education, all being developed in a very sort of disparate way. I think there's a need for more integration. There's a lot more linkage than we think there is. So I think placing a greater emphasis, for example, on the imperatives of integration, synergy, and also a systems approach to development, that I think would be very important. So I think if we looked at the problem from not whether we should choose big or small, perhaps I think what we would see is we would see more complementarities between these two approaches to development. And I would sense that they could actually be mutually reinforcing, not necessarily mutually exclusive, but actually be mutually reinforcing. On the other hand, accepting that there's a dichotomy in big and small development, my own fear would be is that this could actually result in the so-called self-fulfilling prophecy of polarizing. Again, these two, I think, very important tools for development, and in a sense, I think, creating another chasm for the developing world. So I think understanding, for example, I would look at just as small development is a vital tool to address developmental challenges that cannot be ignored in the short run. So, for example, I mean, in a country like Bhutan, we have a huge problem with youth unemployment. That's leading to a lot of issues with child delinquency. Crime rates are going up. drug problem, which we never had in the past, is increasing. Suicide, we don't even have a word for suicide in our language. So these are small problems, but on the other hand, cannot be ignored. They have to be looked at immediately. They have to be addressed immediately. But on the other hand, we can't just focus on small things, because in the long, we have to also look at big development from the perspective of, in the long run, how do we sustain as a nation? Do we always remain dependent on aid, or at some point of time, does our development, move forward based on our own productivity? So in that sense, I think a balanced approach, I think, to these two sort of approaches to development would be important. The important thing about big development, I think, particularly from the way we look from a developing country perspective, is that in the long run, to ensure that we are able to develop on our own, the so-called sustainable development. In that context, I think big development plays a very important part. So that's what I would like to share. Thanks.
It's helpful. Let me ask a follow-up question to that, and if someone has some, just speak out loud. But Abdul Ghani, in regard to the Casablanca Finance City, if you were just starting that project now, would you have looked at it differently in terms of how you would have looked for financing for it, or the objectives you would have gone after? It's a couple years old now, if I'm correct, but let's look at this from the point of view of how did Morocco attack this problem or attack this issue, and as a development objective, are there things that are different now than what you focused on when you started?
My country started this project in 2008. In fact, it was a study launched by the government and the central bank to see is there any opportunity for Casablanca to position, for the government to position Casablanca as a regional financial center, taking into account the achievements so far in the financial sector. And it took 2 years for the study, so it's quite recent. Difficult to say that we can have another view on it. The project has been launched in 2010, and basically we say that Morocco so far has achieved quite very good results and performances at the macroeconomic level, and Morocco has one of the strongest financial sectors in the region, the second in Africa, and the first in the North Africa. And Morocco has a very good relationships and strong relationships with other African countries, and Moroccan companies have already started to establish themselves and to work in many countries in the region. So we said we need a financial center to serve this development, the development of Moroccan companies, the development of Moroccan banks in the region, and there is no financial center in the region to serve that objective. In Africa, you have the South Africa, which is a very well-established financial center, and you have some other ambitions in different countries. So we said, what do we have to do in order to achieve that goal? We have to work on the legal side, on the institutional side. We have to work on taxation. We have to work on human resources, because a financial center, what does it mean? That means that we will have a lot of international financial institutions and other providers of services in like an ecosystem together. So we have a space of 100 hectares which is dedicated to this project in order to have these institutions to be competitive. So we have compared the Morocco to many other emerging countries and mainly to many emerging financial centers, like Singapore, like Dubai, like South Africa, like Qatar, etc. And we identified the main shortcomings of the country in terms at the macro level, at taxation, human resources, the legal system, the doing business system, and so all this. And we have established a plan to work on in order for the country to be competitive, and in order for Casablanca to be competitive and to attract the financial institutions from all over the world to work from Morocco on Africa. And now the project is in its way. We have achieved a lot of things at the institutional level, and many financial institutions and other providers of services, professional services, have already decided to establish in Casablanca. So this is a project that has a lot of dimensions and which serve the development of the country at the end, because having financial institutions in Casablanca, it's not only to export financial services abroad, but also to compete with the local providers, with the local financial institutions, and to have a financial sector which is able to fund the economy and to contribute to the economic development as a whole.
That's helpful. Thank you. Getza, I want to come back to you as well. Could you describe what you would look at as the two most pressing or important development objectives that you think Bhutan has to focus in the next few years?
I would look at education as, one major challenge. A lot of the roots of the problems that we identify, whether it's in terms of inclusive development, whether we talk in terms of disparity, or you talk more in terms of the real economy. Today the catchword is a knowledge economy. Every country has that pretty much embedded in their development plans. A long-term vision is to be a knowledge-based economy. But the challenge, the problem that I saw with education is that it doesn't happen overnight. It's a 10-15-year process at the minimum, and far more complicated than most policymakers tend to think about it. So one, definitely education, Chris. I feel that it's a major challenge most countries are facing. I think those countries that are doing well are getting the education system right. And in Bhutan's context, we have at the highest political level at least a recognition that this is a major problem for us. It's not just about providing access to education. It's, I think, providing access to quality education, and that's a major problem in our context. The second problem I would see is, for a small country like Bhutan, is I think now with this increasing globalization, we are, as we integrate further into the world economy, the external shocks that we were sort of immune to in the past are something now that we have to face, and the capacity to, I think, address these shocks is not something that we have, and again, capacity development again takes time, and there's an imperative to integrate, but on the other hand, with integration comes a lot more risk, and these are the two things that I would see, at least from Bhutan's context. Thanks.
Emma, I know you had a question.
My name is Emma Simon. I'm a graduate from the year 2006, and I've been working for the last 10 years as a policy advisor for the Spanish government. We have been working about this a lot, but I don't have any kind of experience in economics development. And my question, it's quite general, but I've been working a lot in energy policy, and so for that reason, I'm quite concerned in terms of sustainability of economics. And it's not only about energy; also it can be like in industrial policy or tourism policy. Last year, I traveled a little bit in Africa, just to a country that someone representing the countries here, which is a lovely place. But I realized that they are working on, for instance, in tourism development from a perspective that I think that in Spain we can advise in that respect, because Spain, as you may know, it's a very important touristic destination, and we have quite a long period of experience. And I wonder how you, that you are practitioners of development economics, how you introduced the sustainability perspective in your decisions. If the local governments you work with, are they willing to do that, or there is always a trade-off between economic growth and sustainability goals? So that's all.
My personal perspective is that that's incredibly challenging in Africa, certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, where some of the worst impacts of climate change and some of the worst impacts of not taking a sustainable approach will be felt. Unfortunately, the short-term needs are often felt to be so pressing that it's a big challenge. I've been even quite surprised at how short-termist policy making and resource allocation and these sorts of decisions are in the country that I work in. I mean, in some ways it's not surprising, but just how short-termist. To give you a sort of trivial example, a very trivial example compared to the sorts of big issues you're talking about, Lagos has a huge port. It's a major port for the whole of West Africa, although it's very congested. And if you go out in a small boat along the coast from Lagos to the west, you go past this enormous port, Apapa, and we drove on a boat for about an hour, and we must have seen 45, 50 shipwrecks that have just been left, abandoned along the coast, and this is the sort of the level of short-termism, the level of investment in infrastructure is incredibly short-termist. So how with this mentality we can introduce more sustainable development is a challenge that I hope I never have to face, and I leave it to more talented colleagues than me.
Two things I would like to say to mention about to answer your question. In the case, and I will always refer to the Moroccan experience. One thing which is across all sectors, we have a national plan of sustainable development, which is implemented across all sectors. And for example, all projects, whatever they are, it's mandatory to have an environmental impact assessment of the project. It's mandatory for all the projects. And on a specific area, which is energy, Morocco has launched a major project for solar energy to cover by 2020 about 40% of its needs by solar energy. So, two elements from the policy perspective that show how sustainable development is taken into account across all policies.
Very interesting question. Sustainability, if I may just share a perspective from a small Himalayan kingdom called, from Bhutan, a small Himalayan kingdom. Way back in the 80s, the king of Bhutan, he was very young. I mean, he assumed throne in 1972, he was just 17 years old. In the early 80s, he was traveling, and a journalist from the Far Eastern Economic Review sort of mentioned to be a very poor country. In the 70s, we just started development. Prior to 1959, no roads, no electricity, no modern infrastructure. So journalists asked him, "Oh, we understand you're a very poor. Bhutan is a very poor country. How are you going to address the challenges for your country as a young leader?" And he answered back saying, "Yes, we are a poor country, but as the leader of his country, he said that the gross national happiness of my people is more important than the gross domestic product." I mean, that was." That was his statement to the journalists, and ever since, the country has adopted a very broad philosophy, in our development paradigm, and we call it gross national happiness. The main, I think, emphasis on it is what you mentioned, the whole issue of sustainability. At the end of the day, do we take economic growth as an end by itself, or is it a means to an end? And that's a philosophical question that governments would have to ask. And in the context of a small Himalayan country, we felt it was a very important question. And every economic growth paradigm, I think, needs a philosophical base. In practical terms, what does it mean? We have 4 pillars in our development policy. The first is balanced development. So, economic growth is important. We're not saying economic growth is not important, but it needs to be balanced in the sense that growth needs to be inclusive. Number 2, we look at the whole issue of environment. I mean, way back in the 70s itself, environment was very important for Bhutan from a very practical point of view. I mean, we are in the Himalayas, we have a very fragile ecosystem. The environment is very important. So environmental conservation became a second pillar in our development paradigm. Number three was cultural preservation. In our context, we felt as a small country, the preservation of our culture was important. 700,000 people, we felt that was an important pillar for us. And the last one, of course, is good governance. So whether you call it democracy or whatever other forms, but without good governance, you're not going to be able to basically improve the welfare of your people. So that's at a very broad strategic level. But at a sectoral level, for example, tourism, it's a very interesting point you bring. We have a very peculiar tourism policy in Bhutan. I mean, we understand the environmental dimensions of, tourism. It's a very important sector for us, but we deliberately actually regulate tourism in the sense we impose a very high tariff for tourists. Tourists want to visit Bhutan, have to pay $250 a day. They have to go in through a licensed travel agent in Bhutan. And that's because we feel that our environment cannot take too many tourists in. And we've learned from, in this context, we've learned, for example, from our neighbor Nepal. Nepal opened up its tourism to mass tourism. It opened up its mountains. Everest has been climbed. And the damage that the tourism has done to, the mountains is, you cannot reverse it. So in Bhutan, we banned mountaineering. No matter what money was being offered, we said, no, as a policy, we ban mountaineering. They also, environmental reasons, the sense, the watersheds, all the glaciers, all our rivers are fed by the glaciers. And that's one way we tackled it. In terms of forest coverage, I think we adopted our constitution in 2008. We had it as a policy before that, but in 2008, when we adopted our constitution, there's actually a provision that requires all governments to maintain 60% of land under forest cover. We've banned the export of timber from Bhutan, raw timber. So there are, I think, there are ways, I think, economic growth and sustainability need not necessarily be mutually exclusive or at loggerheads. But I think there are a lot of philosophical questions that governments would need to ask. And I think there are a lot of examples where you can, I think, there may be trade-offs in terms of how much growth or how are you going to achieve that growth. But I think there's certainly solutions to also bridge those perceived trade-offs or those perceived differences between growth and sustainability. Thank you.
Thanks. That was an excellent point from Bhutan, and I'm very happy that came up because the whole matter of sustainability, I think it's central to economic development. I wondered what our definitions were for economic development and for small and large as we're discussing it. I'm actually PEPM 1996 or 97, depends on whether you look at my diploma or you ask me. And my name is Patricia Mendoza, and I'm actually a consultant. My own career experience has been interesting because I started out, when I came to PEPM, I was at the Central Bank of Belize. And when I went back, I stayed a few years, and then I was offered a position in the Ministry of Education. And I learned in a very short 8 months, it should have been longer, how central, how important education is to development. And then I was offered a vice minister position in the Ministry of Natural Resources, which you may think has nothing to do with economic development, but indeed it does. And this is around the time of Rio Plus 10. I became very active in the Rio Plus 10 meetings, PrepComs, and really got a handle on sustainable development. And since then, as a consultant on issues like human rights-based approach, which I think the gentleman from DESA, these are ringing through with him, and human development, the Millennium Development Goals. I do a lot of poverty reduction strategies and development planning. So I'm not sure what we thought when the question was first raised. I think there may be more hands that could go up if we really look at the breadth of what economic development is about. And I was hoping that somebody would raise the whole matter of sustainability and sustainable development. And on the matter of project management, the project approach. DFID, DESA, from my experience working with them, even now, I'm working currently on a project that has to do with climate change. The Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program, these are all initiatives or their efforts in these areas to support community-based development, which I think may be somewhat related to your question, and the whole matter of convergence. So the macro planning is one thing, and it's very important because, of course, if your fiscal is crowding your space for social development, then you do have a problem. So you have to deal with the macro. But you also have to simultaneously, I believe, deal with the communities, give them a voice, indigenous people. These are all the current trends, the current terminologies, the current areas of focus in economic development from my experience just now.
Okay. Very helpful, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts around those points? The question of sustainability as a definition within economic development and human rights are essential, and it's hard to capture them all, of course, but it seems incredibly important that needs to be more of the focus going forward than the simple infrastructure questions of the past. Maybe what we could do, we want to close fairly soon, but we haven't talked about really the changing nature of where financing and sources of money are coming from. While that's a lot to capture, there was an element of that Patricia, I wanted to ask you about in regard to private sector development. What are you seeing at Department for International Development in regard to priorities to engage investment from the private sector to promote development?
I mean, it's certainly, I would say, one of the Department for International Development's two priorities at the moment. Unlike other development agencies, the Department for International Development has increased its development budget recently, unusually, but which is great for people like me who got a job as a result of that increase. But it has come with a responsibility to be more accountable and more transparent about how those funds are used, and to put more emphasis on impact evaluation evidence in the use of those funds and the design of programs, and to be held more accountable for that impact. So that's been one priority. The second priority has been to use DFID's programs to create an enabling environment for local and foreign investment, private sector investment, and to use DFID's own funds to lever that investment. So, for example, in infrastructure projects, to increase the availability of funding for design work, legal work, kind of pre-build work, to viability gap fund, to support the structuring of financial deals for infrastructure. These are all things which are not in my field, but they're certainly, I think, going to be growing areas of importance. And if somebody does have skills in those areas, I think you're going to be more in demand than sort of traditional sort of enterprise development, small business development type support for the private sector.
Does that suggest an offloading of responsibility from traditional donors and the World Bank to seeing more done by the private sector?
I don't know if it's an offloading of responsibility. I think it's a shift that's already happening in the countries that have seen high levels of growth. I think it's a natural evolution, if you like, of development. I mean, I don't think that our government sees its role as financing infrastructure in certainly not lower middle income countries. It won't finance infrastructure in Nigeria.
Ketsa or Abdul Ghani, do you have thoughts on this as well?
Well, I would like to speak about the role of development financial institutions mainly. You know that development financial institutions like the World Bank or the regional development banks play a very important role in helping and in supporting development of these countries. They bring money, but not only money, they bring expertise, and they help to build capacity. However, when we have democratic governments, when we have governments that really are willing to change, to lead the change, the role of the development institutions has to change also. They have really to help this country appropriate the whole reforms. I mean, the development should come from within, and these institutions have to show willingness and ability to change and to adapt to the local needs and to the changes in the way and the priority of the governments. I will give you an example, and Patricia knows this problem. The use of national systems in implementing aid, in implementing funds coming from international institutions. You know, when the World Bank is funding a project in a developing country, they used to require that this country use the World Bank system in the public procurements and everything. And there was a huge debate about, because we have a dual system, one system for international funds and one system for national funds. And that doesn't help to build capacity. What developing countries were asking is to help these countries improve their systems and to use the system effectively in implementing international aid. And this took a lot of time to get the World Bank and other institutions to get convinced, and not totally. I mean, they are starting using the national systems in some countries where they have the, I mean, where they come to an agreement that these systems are quite strong and they can be used in implementing. I think the international institutions have to adapt quickly to national priorities, to national and government willingness, mainly and especially when these governments are emanating from transparent elections and they are truly representing their people, because those are our institutions. We are members of these institutions. And this is a bureaucracy, and the way it works, we come to, at the end, it's like we have the international institutions in one side and the countries in another side, and it's too, the reality is that these institutions have to serve the interest and to best serve the interest of their members, and their members mainly are now, and the recipients are mainly developing countries. The money is really, with the international crisis, is the sources of money are shrinking, and we see that emerging countries are now able to fund these international institutions more than the developed countries can do. But they ask for one thing. They ask for improving and changing the governance and get more power in these institutions. And I think we will see a huge debate about this. It's already started in the IMF. It's already started in the World Bank, and we will see to which conclusions we will come. But for the countries themselves, for the recipients, I think they have to focus on efficiency of what they receive. You see, some countries have 25% of GDP as the rate of investment. Some others have 20%, some others have 30%. And you see that some countries that have 20% have a higher growth than those who have 30 or 35%. So efficiency is key, and these institutions have to help developing countries to improve the efficiency of investment. The efficiency of investment, I mean, investment should lead to growth, and growth should lead and should be more inclusive in order to serve all the population needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we missed any aspects to this that anyone wants to ask a question about or has a comment? Clearly, we've just scratched the surface of how much we can talk about this, and we appreciate your time today in participating. This is, again, a good reminder that if you're not already using the PEPM LinkedIn group or looking at the Facebook page, it is a resource that I would ask you to go back to your classes, your connections in your classes, to make sure you're signing up. because the ability for us to maintain this type of debate individually and as a group is dramatically improved by having that resource. Our ability to benefit as PEPM alumni is to talk to each other like this. So please make it something that you'll do when you go back and talk to your classmates as well by email, and let's try to expand that. Thank you for having us.